Hi there. So today I'm going to read the next installment of The False Prince. And I'm actually going to step it up a little bit and read 4 chapters, chapters 18 to 22, instead of just 2. Because there are 54 chapters and I would like to get to the end of the story because it's so good. After being dismissed from Connor's office, Mott walked us back to the courtyard to continue with swordsmanship lessons. Tense feelings of vengeance and silent accusation hung in the air between Roden, Tobias, and me. Mott rotated a pair of us for dueling practice while he worked on the skills with a third. The wooden swords Mott gave us were severely tested for durability as they clacked against each other, or in a lucky moment hit against an opponent's arm, back, or leg. Roden was merciless against me and brutal with Tobias. I did very well against Tobias, but Mott said he was disappointed in my performance against Roden. This is more than just learning swordplay, Mott said. You must learn it as Prince Jaren knew it. He challenged a king to a duel at the age of 10. What does that tell you about his attitude in battle? That he was stupid, I said flatly. If the story's true, he'd lost that duel. It shows his bravery, Roden said, ever eager to please. And his training, he must have expected to win. I barked out a laugh. If he did, add arrogance to his list of worthless traits. It's too bad the prince we're trying to become isn't the older brother, Damon. Darius, Tobias corrected. Whatever. It sounds like he had a character, worth imitating. Not Jaren. Mott stepped closer to me. I find it interesting that you'd say that, Sage, considering you naturally have several character traits in common with Jaren. I was silent for a moment, as emotions I didn't understand filled me. What was it? Shame to acknowledge that Mott was correct? Was I as foolhardy as Jaren seemed to have been? Or was something telling me not to try for the crown? Perhaps in having fewer of Jaren's character flaws, Roden or Tobias might make a better king. Mott seemed to be waiting for me to say something, so without knowing whether I was correct or not, I shrugged and said, Jaren was a child when he challenged that king to a duel. Perhaps he learned his lesson and would make wiser choices today. Mott frowned. I never thought Jaren's challenge was a sign of weakness. I'm sorry that you do. Now let's continue. Mott paired me with Roden for another round while he worked with Tobias. I held my own until Roden got me backed into a corner. I lowered my sword to end the duel, but Roden took the opportunity to strike a hard blow at my chest. I reeled backward, then dropped my sword and lunged at him. One solid punch from me would teach him a much-needed lesson about sportsmanship. Mott pulled me off him and yelled, Bad form, Roden. This is a practice, not a match. You should have stopped when Sage lowered his sword. Sorry, Roden mumbled. I didn't mean it, just had a lot of energy. Mott turned to me. And Sage? I won't apologize, I said, folding my arms. Mott considered that a moment, then said, No, I wouldn't either. Shake hands, boys, then I'll take you back. Roden offered me his hand, and I reluctantly took it, but with a simple shake we both shrugged off the anger. While Roden replaced our swords, I watched as Mott brushed his fingers across the empty space where the imitation of Jaren's sword had been. Mott clearly loved that sword. I couldn't understand why. Roden walked along beside me back to Farthenwood. No hard feelings, I hope, about the way that match ended. Do that to me again and I'll kill you, I said. He smiled grimly, not sure whether it was a joke or not. I wasn't sure either. It's safe to tell me if you took the sword, he said. Not a bad way of changing the subject, so I played along. A secret that is safe between you, me, and Master Connor, I said with a wry, sideways glance. It's not an accusation, Roden said, then lowered his voice. It's more likely that Tobias took it anyway. Why's that? Roden shook his head. Don't you know? You always seem to have everything figured out before any of the rest of us. I didn't know, and I told him so. You know how bad he is with a sword. I was obviously the best out there, and you're not great, but you're better than he is. I smiled. If that were true, I wouldn't have so many bruises. Roden continued. Tobias needs the sword to help him look more like the prince. Tobias would look foolish wearing a sword at his side that he can't even use properly. So what do you propose? I hope Connor chooses me, Roden said, but if he doesn't, then I hope he chooses you, not Tobias. For Carthia's sake, I wouldn't want him as prince, whether Connor is behind the throne or not. If you or I band together, we can sabotage him. Then what happens when it's down to you and me? Will you sabotage me as well? Roden looked down at the trail. I might, and I know you might sabotage me too. How did we get to this place? I asked, fully aware there was no answer. No matter what we do, the devils have us. Roden playfully knocked me in the side with his shoulder. The devils had you long ago, Sage. Tobias had gotten quite a ways ahead of us by this point. He turned back and called, Hurry up, you two! I won't be late for dinner because of your slacking. Dinner with Connor was uncomfortable at best. Tobias and Roden were seated at his right and left. As a sign of his displeasure with me, I was in the third position, farthest away. I picked up my dishes and reset them at the far end of the table, so that I directly faced Connor. Why'd you do that? Connor asked. We can't see each other where I was at, I said. This makes more sense. Maybe I have no wish to see you, Connor said. If that were true, you'd have had Mott keep me in my room. In any event, it is very rude. It was prince-like, I said. A prince would never let anyone else determine his seat. After a brief hesitation, Connor smiled and raised his glass in toast to me. Indeed. Connor took several opportunities during dinner to point out the errors I was making in manners. Tobias and Roden weren't making the same mistake, so they must have had this lesson the night before. While I was lying on the ground by the river, I told him I'd make fewer mistakes if I didn't have to use my right hand for everything. He pointed out that it wasn't likely the prince would switch to the left hand for me, so I'd have to be the one to change. I corrected the errors, and Connor moved on. Despite my objection that it was a boring topic more suited for Master Graves than dinner conversation, he indulged us with a lecture on the customs of castle life, the daily schedule a king might manage. If he's king, why is he tied to a schedule? I asked. Why couldn't he tell all his subjects that he's off doing what he wants and they can wait? He could, Connor said, but his primary responsibility is to his country, not to himself. He is a manager, a decision-maker, a leader, not a child at play. But if one of us takes the throne, you do most of that for us, wouldn't you? Connor shook his head. I'll be there to help you function in your role. I'll be a counselor, a guide. But you will be king. Connor went quiet while Imogen and two other servants brought in the next course of our meal. She served Roden instead of me and didn't look at any of us. When she turned, I got a glimpse of a dark bruise over her left cheek. She'd been wearing her hair to hide it, but when she bent over, the bruise was obvious. Where'd you get that? I asked her. She glanced up at me, then quickly looked down. So I turned to Connor. Where'd she get that bruise? He waved his hand non-committally. She has a reputation for clumsiness. I expect she ran into a cupboard wall. Or a door. Isn't that right, Imogen? Imogen looked from Connor to me, then back at Connor and nodded. Nobody in that room could have missed the fear in her eyes. Somebody did that to her, I said. Nonsense, Connor said. Imogen, if somebody hurt you, you'd tell me, wouldn't you? He laughed at his own joke. Obviously, Imogen could not have told him, and I suspected if she could, she still wouldn't have dared. We have business, Connor said to all the servants in the room. You may all go. When they left, Connor said, You seem very interested in that girl's affairs, Sage. Somebody gave her that bruise. We know it wasn't an accident. She's a servant girl, beneath your station now. Let those in her circles look after her interests. Those in her circles probably caused it. Connor brushed off my statement with an empty promise to look into the matter, then said, Forget the servant girl and remember why you're here. Did you know the prince is already engaged to be married? That had Roden's attention. Already? To who? To whom, Roden? The betrothed princess Amarinda of Voltaine was chosen at her birth for the crown prince Darius. She is the niece of the king Bimar, and an alliance between Ecbert's home and hers is necessary for continued peace in Carthia. The betrothal was King Ecbert's idea. His wife, Queen Erin, was from an inconsequential border town in southern Carthia, unknown in any social circles of the upper class. He was expected to choose from amongst the nobleman's daughters, so there was a great controversy when he married. Even today, little is known about her life before the marriage. For all his weakness in defending his borders, he was always a great defender of his wife. Why was that necessary? Tobias asked. What was she before? Some sort of criminal? Bite those words, Connor ordered. She was your queen, Tobias, and a respectable woman always. My only point is that Egbert wanted to avoid a similar uproar with his son. Now that Darius has been killed, the betrothal will pass to Prince Jarin, if he is found. If you take the crown, you will one day take Amarinda as your wife. But if she was engaged to Darius, Roden asked. She was betrothed to the throne, not the prince. Amarinda will marry the man who becomes king. Marry? Tobias chuckled loudly, echoed by Roden and me. Not until you're older, of course, Connor said. But when the time comes, she will be yours. What does she look like? I asked. Connor raised an eyebrow and I added, Seems to me a girl whose marriage is guaranteed might not need to take care of her looks as much as one who has yet to catch a man's eye. You shall see for yourself, Connor said. I have invited her to dinner at the end of this week. But if she sees us, Tobias said, you three will be in disguise as servants amongst my staff. She is a betrothed princess and will hardly deign to look at any of you. But I want you to see her, to gain an understanding of her mannerisms and style. It will help you after you take the throne. So what is she like? Roden asked. You'll have to judge that for yourselves, but I suspect she will appeal to you boys and make our contest that much more interesting. Roden and Tobias perked up at the prospect of seeing her, but I only slumped back in my chair. Connor had collected another victim in this hideous game, and the princess would never even know it. Back in our rooms that night, Roden went straight to bed. Tobias was at his desk reading another book. I lay on my bed, staring out the window. Tucked beneath my pillow was a spool of thread, a needle, and a small pair of sewing shears. I did have a tear in a shirt from the horse ride, but I wasn't going to repair it. When I had enough privacy, I planned to cut the shirt up and sew a few pockets into the linings of my clothes. The vest I wore in the daytime had only one useless pocket on the outside. I needed a way to hide items inside my clothes where nobody would think to look. After verifying the sewing items were well hidden, I sat up and stared out the window near my bed. I pulled a garland from my vest pocket, stolen from Connor's pocket after dinner, and absent-mindedly let it roll over my knuckles. When it reached my pinky finger, I carried it with my thumb back to my forefinger. Nice trick, Tobias said. It helps me think. What are you thinking about? Ways to get you to stop talking to me? Tobias wasn't fazed. While I have candlelight in this room, you can't possibly see outside. What are you staring at? Nothing. This is what you do during lessons as well. Are you lost in your daydreams? Dreaming of what my life might have been like if I had made other decisions. Tobias set his book down flat on the table. Like what? If I had stayed with my family. Then you'd have become a drunken musician like your father was. Probably, but I wouldn't be here. I turned back to him. Are you content with the choices you've made? I never made any choices, Tobias said. After my parents died, I was told to go live with my grandmother, so I did. After she died, I was told to go to the orphanage, so I did. Then I was told to come here, so I did. And when Connor tells you what you'll do as king, you will. No, Tobias took a deep breath, picked up his book again, and then in a calmer voice added, I have a plan. I know what I'll do after I'm crowned. I went back to looking out the window. I hope it works for you. It will. I've worked out every detail. Stop staring out that window. Why does it matter to you? Because it's pointless when I know you can't see outside. Perhaps you're using it as a mirror to admire yourself. Then Tobias looked down at his papers and suddenly gathered them all together in a pile. I can't see your papers, I said tiredly. You're being foolish. Nonetheless, Tobias took his papers and threw them in the fire. He blew out his candle and said, I'm going to bed now. It was a long time until he fell asleep. I had a hard time outlasting him, but I was determined to get outside Farthenwood tonight. I inched the window open and crept onto the narrow ledge directly beneath it. There was little room for error, but it was a calm night and there were plenty of places to grip onto the walls. I'd be fine. A neighing sound in the pasture caught my attention first. Connor's wild mare had returned home. That was good news for me. It would diminish any sting in Connor's anger toward me for having lost her. It was good news for Cregan as well. Time off from his sentence of service to Connor. It was amazing how much I could learn from Farthenwood from the exterior. With a fair amount of climbing and using the ledges, I could see into many of the windows. I only saw a few people still awake at this late at night, and there were windows in nearly every room. The more favored servants' quarters were on the main floor in the corners of the house. A few of the windows were covered in curtains. The rooms with curtained windows likely belonged to Imogen and the other female servants, but I never tried to see into them. The idea of being caught staring into a room of sleeping women was not a pleasant one. They'd mark me as a peeping Tom with no idea that it was the farthest thought from my mind. The center of the main floor was living space such as Connor's office, the library, the music room, the dance hall, and the dining room. The kitchen and other servant areas were in the back. Bedrooms were on the upper floor. Connor's room was on the opposite side of the house from ours. There were other rooms between them, few of which interested me. I wasn't sure yet how to get onto the top floor of Farthenwood, which was only a third of the area of the other floors. The nursery/schoolroom where Roden and I took lessons was up there, but I wasn't sure of what else. Likely there were apartments for a governess and possibly more bedrooms. I might eventually find my way up to that level, but I wasn't trying too hard. It didn't seem that anything interesting was up there. I shinnied down a drain pipe to reach solid ground. Always a nice feeling. And set about exploring the grounds. I passed through the stables, the archery courtyard, a wide vegetable garden, and then another carefully tended flower garden. The thought nagged at me again to just run. But I knew I wouldn't dare. The assurance of that confirmed my worst suspicions about myself, that deep inside, I really was a coward. The crescent moon had shifted in the sky before I decided to return to my bedroom, where Connor so smugly believed he held us prisoner. It was dark enough that I had to feel for the edges of the window to find the small gap to open it again. But there was no gap. The window was shut tight. I pressed on it, but it was either locked or stuck beyond my ability to open it. I wondered what I should do. Tap on the window and get Roden and Tobias to let me in? They'd certainly tell Mott or Connor, and I'd face a terrific punishment for that. As it turned out, I didn't have that decision to make. Tobias sat up in bed and looked directly at me. Then a wicked smile spread across his face. He arched his eyebrows as if asking what I intended to do about this problem. I held out both hands, then pointed to the window. He shook his head slowly, then rolled over and lay back down again. I looked at Roden, but if he was awake I couldn't tell. He wasn't facing me and wasn't moving, except for a slow rise and fall of his body. I wondered if he was a part of Tobias's trick. Roden and I had agreed to sabotage Tobias. Maybe Roden also made an agreement with Tobias to sabotage me. If so, it would leave him free of both of us as threats. It would be a clever plan, and I almost regretted that I had not thought of it. I leaned my head against the stone wall of Farthenwood and balanced my feet on the narrow ledge. It wouldn't be long before the morning servants would awaken to begin preparing the house for a daytime routine. I was running out of time. A few of the servants' windows were open, but it didn't seem like a good idea to go through any of them. Too many people, most of whom would be waking up soon. Besides, then I'd have to get all the way upstairs and past Mott, or whoever stood guard outside our room at night, all without being seen. Connor's window was slightly open. That would at least get me on the right floor. Then I could keep watch and hope for a sleeping servant guarding my door, or an easily distracted one. As risky as it was to use his room, it was my best choice. Maybe my only choice. Connor had a small balcony outside his room. The door was bolted shut to keep it from blowing open during a wind gust, but the window beside the balcony was opened enough to let a slight breeze through. The window gave easily as I pressed on it. It was much larger than the window by my bed, so there was no difficulty in sliding my body into his room. I stood still for a long time to be sure of the rhythm of his sleep and the depth of his breaths and their cycle. He snored softly, which I appreciated because it gave me some cover for any sound I might make. His wide canopy bed was draped in so much fabric it was difficult to see his body. The sounds of his snoring would have been enough to assure me I was safe. Back in Miss Terbelli's orphanage, I'd spent more nights than days roaming through the rooms. I knew how to test for a floor's squeak before placing my weight on it. I knew how to open a door, a closet, or a drawer so that it didn't create a sense of movement in the room. And I knew how to stay invisible. At least, I knew how to do it there. Here it was a little more complicated. I wasn't familiar with the layout of Connor's room, and there wasn't much light to work with. Connor's room was larger than our bedroom, ridiculously large for only one man, but he was the master here. So if this was the room he wanted, it was his. On one end of the room to my left was his bed and several large wardrobes along the far wall for his many fine clothes. Near me was a cushioned chair where he could look out over the balcony onto the back lawn while he sipped a morning tea. To my right were rows of shelves filled with books. He had so many more in his office below that I couldn't help but wonder if he'd actually read all those books, or were they merely for show? Probably he'd read them. Connor was a thorough man. I was briefly curious about the titles, about what books he studied. Then Connor mumbled something unintelligible in his sleep and rolled over. It was time to go. The door into the hallway was shut tight. One of the problems that concerned me was not knowing what I'd find on the other side. Was his room guarded or waited on by a night servant? A nobleman's often is, but I wouldn't know until I opened the door, and there was a stiff penalty for guessing wrong. Then in the moonlight, something caught my eye, hinting at a possibility I'd suspected but not yet proved. The fringe on a hanging tapestry was pinched between walls. Connor had told us earlier that he knew all the secrets of Farthenwood. I hoped this is what he had meant. Either the interior walls were uncommonly thick, or Farthenwood had secret passages. I took my time crossing the floor of Connor's bedroom. Wood floors are notorious for their creaks, and I didn't want to cause the creak that woke him. Once I reached the wall, finding the way to open the door into the passageway was remarkably easy. 3 finger holes were carved into the wall, but hidden by the border of the tapestry. I opened the door to the passage as slowly as possible and no wider than necessary. In a bind, I can get through small spaces. This was a very big bind, and I allowed myself only a very small space to enter. Once inside, I saw that the passage was barely lit, with oil lamps set in sconces and spaced far enough apart that a person could make his way through. It was narrow and poorly marked for any exit points, except for a small handle on the wall that released the hidden door to open. I took a few wrong turns, entering other guest rooms that were fortunately empty. When I came to our room, I immediately saw why Connor had chosen to put us here. There was a small hole at the base of the wall that I had previously mistaken for a mouse hole. It was no such thing. Connor had given us a room where, if he wanted to, he could listen to our conversations. Connor still used the tunnels, or one of his surrogates did. That's why oil lamps were kept burning all the time. I would have to use great caution if I chose to return here. I silently pressed the secret door, letting myself back into our room. Tobias and Roden were both asleep in their beds. I watched each of them for a while, wondering if in different circumstances any of us might have become friends. Then I shook it off. It had been a long time since I dared call anyone a friend. The concept was only theoretical to me now. Tobias woke early that morning to find me sound asleep in my bed, and nobody the wiser. He stared at me open-mouthed while I finally woke up, until I rolled over to fall asleep again. Tobias never asked me the story of how I got back into our room, and I never offered it. Errol entered my room that morning with the clothes I'd worn when Connor first brought me here. Finally, I said, why the delay? Errol hesitated, finally deciding that instead of answering, he'd ask whether I'd had any reward for him. I don't know what you're talking about, I said lightly, but if you're ever in the library, there's a small bump in the pages of Connor's family history. You might straighten them out. Errol grinned. No offense, sir, but all 3 of you came in here empty-handed. It might be wise for me to ask where that coin came from. I shook my head. The truth is, Errol, that would not be wise at all. Thanks for returning my clothes. Now get out and leave me alone. I can put those clothes away, sir. So can I. Close the door behind you. When he left, I unfolded the clothes to inspect them. They'd been washed, and a ripple in the side of my shirt was mended, but otherwise they seemed the same as before. These were so much more like me. I didn't belong in the silks and fine weaves Connor costumed us in. They weren't comfortable. I didn't feel like a gentleman while wearing them, and certainly not like a prince. I felt like a fraud, which in the truest definition of the word, I was. Before folding the trousers, I checked the pockets. My eyes widened, and I yelled for Errol to come back into the room. I had something in this pocket, I said. Where is it? Errol shook his head, but clearly he knew the answer. You had nothing of value in there, sir. I moved closer to him, and his face paled. Did you throw it out, then? In almost a whisper, Errol said, Connor heard you wanted these back. He insisted on inspecting them before they were returned to you. If anything is missing, sir, you should ask him. Minutes later, I stormed into Connor's small dining room, slamming the door against the wall. Where's my gold? Where's Mott? Connor asked. He should have escorted you. He doesn't know I left. Where is it? I can't imagine what you're talking about. Now come sit and have some breakfast. He gestured to a seat near Rhoda and Tobias, who were both staring at me as if I'd gone completely insane. I had no intention of sitting. The gold. In the pockets of the clothes I wore before coming here, you took it. That's what this is about? Connor laughed. Stupid boy. That rock you carried wasn't gold. Yes, it is. And it's mine. Connor shook his head. It's imitator's gold, Sage. You probably bought it from a swindler in the marketplace. It was a gift, and it's real. I want it back. No. Connor folded his hands together. You're training to become a prince, even a king. A king wouldn't carry imitator's gold in his pocket. Study hard to become royalty, and I'll see that you carry real gold wherever you go. We're all imitators here, so if you're right about the gold, then there's no more important thing for me to carry than that rock. Where is it? It's mine now, Connor said. I'm sure I'll find a useful purpose for it one day. Maybe as a skipping stone in a nearby river. Now please sit down. We were about to discuss the royal lineage. You discuss it, I said. I've got better things to do. And I stormed out. I didn't make it to the reading or history lessons that morning. Tobias, Roden, and I were on our way out to the stables that afternoon when Mott and Cregan strode toward us. I was eating an apple swiped from the kitchen, but from the expressions on their faces, I didn't think I'd get to finish it. They look angry, Tobias said to me. What did you do? Is it always something I've done, I asked. Don't you and Roden ever do anything worth their attention? It's always something you've done, Roden agreed. Although I was tempted, there was no point in running. We were trapped between the stables and the house, so they'd catch me anyway. Besides, whatever punishment was coming my way, I didn't need to complicate it further. Cregan placed both hands on my chest and shoved me to the ground. Sure enough, the apple rolled out of my hand and into the dirt. Where is that rock? He asked. The fall to the ground knocked the breath out of me, but I still muttered. It's gold. You stole it from the master. Who stole it from me? What I did only set the universe back in order. You don't want this fight, Sage, Mott warned. Now please, where's the rock? I set my jaw forward and dug the heel of my boot into the dirt. Maybe he was right, but I wasn't going to admit it. Take him, Mott said to Cregan, who pulled out his knife and ordered me to stand. When I did, he pressed the knife to my neck and grabbed my arm. With Cregan by my side and Mott on my heels, we walked back to Farthenwood. Connor was waiting for me in his office, standing behind his wide oak desk. Cregan threw me into the chair in front of the desk, and he and Mott stood on opposite sides of me. Where is the rock? Connor said coldly. Isn't it in your desk where you left it? I countered with an equal coolness to my voice. That set Connor off. He nodded at Cregan, who slapped me hard across my cheek. I tasted blood in my mouth and closed my eyes a moment before the sting eased enough that I could open them. I bought you from the orphanage, Connor yelled. That means I own you, which means I own everything that belonged to you. That rock is mine. If it's not real gold, then why do you want it? I asked. Because I don't want you to have it. I will not present someone to the court who carries imitator's gold in his pocket. Where is it? Maybe you lost it, I said. Cregan slapped me again, harder this time. Take him to the dungeon, Connor whispered. Do what you must, but leave no scars. No, wait! My eyes widened as fear gripped me. I knew what would happen there. Don't do this, Connor. It's just a rock. Is that what you want to hear? Connor pressed both hands flat on his desk as he leaned toward me. What I want, Sage, is for you to bend to my will. If I tell you to jump from a cliff, I want you to jump. If I tell you to swim to the far side of the ocean, I want you to swim. I don't care about the rock. But if I tell you that it's no longer yours, then I will have your loyalty, respect, and obedience. I'll give you one last chance. Where is it? My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that I barely heard him. All I knew was that he would not get that rock, even if my life depended on it. And I suspected that it did. Take him, Connor said. Mott and Cregan grabbed each of my arms and literally dragged me, kicking and screaming, out the door.